Welcome back to the Political Podcast. This is now episode 2, and thank you to everyone who liked and commented on our last interview with Nick McGowan. It is really appreciated. For this interview, for this episode, we'll be interviewing politicians and talking about their politics, talk about their lives before politics. We have Jade Benham. Jade, thank you for joining us today.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
For the viewers out there, many of them might not know who you are, as you are still just a newly elected member to Parliament. I think just over a year now, for, to the day.
It was actually, yesterday was our 12-month anniversary. So,
Yeah,
it's been one full year.
366 days, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah. So if you could give the viewers just a little brief description of yourself before we get into the questions, that would be awesome.
Yeah, so I'm the member for Mildura, the Nationals member for Mildura, and I don't know if many of your viewers slash listeners would know much about the Nationals, but we are a team. There's 9 of us in the lower house, 2 in the upper house of the Victorian Parliament now, and we're actually a team of everyday people that have had long careers in other aspects of life before entering politics. I spent some time, literally 3 years in local government, became deputy mayor, then mayor of our local council, but have been a small business owner, grew up on a farm, and yeah, I'm a mother to 2 of my own kids and 2 stepkids. And our whole team is very similar to me. Quite often I'll hear things like, "Oh, you're not your typical Nat," but I absolutely am the typical Nat these days.
That's great. That's great. So, um, we'll get started on some of the questions. I think have you seen some of the questions that we sent through?
I
Um,
have, yes.
yeah. So, yeah, I'll start off with the first question. So, Jade, you grew up on a stone fruit block. How did growing up on a stone fruit block help you grow and mature and shape the woman you are today?
Well, you kind of have to, I suppose, be pretty resilient on a farm. It's one of those things that from a very early age, mum and dad would be out in the shed packing of a night time. So my sister and I would, get ourselves off to bed if we weren't out there helping them. But from a very young age, and I mean, 9, 10, 11, we were out on the farm helping, picking fruit, sorting fruit, riding motorbikes from a very young age, learning to drive cars at a very young age. And I've got a 16-year-old stepson now who still is not interested in learning to drive or get his L's, which is incredibly frustrating. But yeah, I think it certainly armed me with a level of resilience that I wish my kids also had, but I think I guard them a little bit much. But yeah, growing up on a farm was great because you also learn to be very, very practical people and problem solve on your own, because you know that when you're out there and you're quite isolated, nobody else is coming to help you. So you need to be able to solve problems on your own.
Yeah, exactly. I think farming in general really gives, a lot of young kids who do grow up on farms, they do get that, individualistic abilities so they can work on their own and, it's a really good thing to have. So, because did you grow up on a farm in the Mildura area specifically, or was it towards some of the other areas, some of our other country areas in Victoria?
No, it was slightly upstream along the Murray River, just out of a place called Swan Hill. So right now I'm
Ah,
based in Robinvale, which is the biggest almond producing region in Australia. It produces 75% of Australia's almonds, I think. But yeah, stone fruit is not grown up there so much because it gets a little bit too hot. But yeah, so I grew up in Swan Hill, where stone fruit is quite abundant: peaches, nectarines, apricots.
yeah, I think that's majority of where our stone fruit comes from as well, up in that Swan Hill sort of area. So, yeah, thank
Certainly
you
is, yeah.
for supplying us with some great fruit.
You're welcome.
All right, so we'll get on now to our second question that we're going to ask Jade, and I believe Tobias, you have
Y-
this question.
Yes, I do. Uh, how is your high school slash university life? Do you have any memorable moments?
I have many memorable moments. So I didn't actually go to university. I had planned to. I was not a great student, particularly in my senior years of high school. I was there for the social aspects rather than the learning. I was also one of the younger ones of the year level, and I think that makes a difference, which is why I've not held them back, but made sure that my kids had an extra year of kinder, so that the older ones, so they can really thrive. I just got by surviving and being there for the social side. I did okay, in year 11 and 12. I was not too worried about what kind of ATAR I was going to get, because I actually didn't know what I wanted to do. I think sometimes it's unfair to expect, teenagers who are struggling already with their changing bodies and all these hormones, to expect them to know what they want to go to study. So yeah, I wasn't really that stressed about it. Thankfully for me, I ended up getting a traineeship in radio straight out of year 12. So I went through, did all my exams. I got accepted into Swinburne Media, but by that stage I had a traineeship, so which was fantastic. And it turned into me working in radio for 13 or 15 years, which was, yeah, I couldn't have asked for a better outcome, really. That's not the norm, but I suppose one of the most memorable moments towards the end of year 12, I had a bike accident and back in my day, so, bikes were, they had metal spiky pedals on them, and I came off my bike on a 45-degree day and ripped my knee open. So my my second exam, which was Australian history, and we'd studied the Whitlam dismissal that year, I had to do with my knee up, and I did it as quickly as I possibly could because I was in so much pain after an accident. But yeah, I had many memorable moments at school. There was also one moment I do remember in year 7 where there was an event. We didn't have cinemas at that time in town, but they were showing a movie at the town hall, and I went along and saw a group of girls that I knew from school, so I went and sat with them, and one or two of them who were they were the bullies of the year. They were just awful, and they probably still are, because let's face it, they probably peaked in high school and haven't really moved on. They were just awful, and they told me that I wasn't welcome to sit with them and I should go away, and all that kind of stuff. I remember that very vividly, and used that to sort of, I suppose, want to be better than that all the time. And to be very conscious of how I remember how that made me feel, and I'm just very conscious that I don't ever want to make anyone feel like that. So I remember that, taking that right through school, because it happened very early in year 7.
Yeah. I think many of our listeners as well have experienced, dealings with the mean girls at school. So, I mean, even some of us probably have as well.
Yeah, I mean, the mean girls are just, they make me want to roll my eyes. And like I said, I've got 2 teenage stepkids, and they are really nice kids, thank goodness. But one of them is, currently having some experiences with mean girls. But true to form, it's water off a duck's back for her, and she's the same. She's like, you girls are just going to peak in high school, and you'll be working for me one day. And I'm like, yes. So the message is getting through.
She's just following in her mother's footsteps, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what subject did you actually complete in year 12? Do you remember? So, of course, English and Australian history. If you could.
I did English, Australian history, psychology, which I told the teacher I was going to study subliminally, because I would nap in class all the time. But I told her it's psychology, and I really wanted to study the impacts of subliminal learning. And she gave me a certificate at the end of the year, because I ended up getting an A on the final exam. And art and studio art. And I'd done graphics, I think, the year before, units 3 and 4. So I did all art subjects. I did nothing that was going to help me with an ATAR, nothing at all. But I didn't care, because I really enjoyed the subjects that I did do. And I really loved Australian history and studying the Whitlam dismissal. And I think that's where my interest in politics probably first started.
Yeah, because I know as well. I think Tobias, you did Viscom this year, didn't you?
I know I did
Oh no,
Viscom
sorry,
last
Studio
year.
Art.
I did Viscom and art last year, and then I did art and exhibition this year because I changed it.
Ah, yeah. So I guess Tobias and you, Jade, probably have some similar subjects that you did in year 12.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll get on now to our third question that we have for you, Jade. So on your parliamentary website, you spent some time in the US and the UK working in media. Can you briefly
Mm.
talk about your experiences overseas and how is it different to being the member for Mildura?
Oh, it's so different, so different. And I'll have to briefly talk about it. So after I'd worked in radio for some time, I was a bit burnt out. I was 26 and creative director at Nova 100 in Melbourne. And it was only in its infancy. It was still only 6 years old. We still only had 2 ads in a row. Still very cool. And they decided they were going to change that. So a few of the original crew went, nah, we're out. So I went to do summer camp in Michigan because I wanted to go live in a tree somewhere. They found me a tree house on the banks of Lake Michigan, which was brilliant. So I went there to do that. And then after that, because I had a working student visa, I went off to finish the season in Vermont, then went over to California and ended up getting a job at Stanford University and an au pair, so doing both part-time. And someone that never went to university, working for a gastroenterologist in the medical suites there was phenomenal. So yeah, that was great. And then I went to the UK, and some of my friends from Nova were already living and working there and ended up getting a job at a global digital media agency called Isobar, who managed digital media. Again, it was still very new then. Ad serving was new. It was only brand new to be able to serve an ad to a PlayStation or an Xbox game. These type of things were dynamic ads were very new and exciting. But one highlight from the UK is that Microsoft took us for a rally car driving day. There was me and 9 other men who, of course, thought that I wouldn't be a threat at all. Little did they know I had been driving since I was 10 years old. I grew up on a farm, and that day I beat 9 blokes in a rally car day. So, and I left when I left, I left the trophy there just to remind them and never forget. Don't ever judge a woman's driving ability.
Yeah. I mean, probably those driving lessons from when you were 10, 11 years old really helped you in that rally car race, didn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think I ever had an official lesson. Dad just said, here's the clutch, here's the gear stick. A clutch is what we used to have to use. For you guys will probably never ever see a clutch because I don't think they make manual cars anymore. But yeah, no, it was it certainly did help. And I do say now, even now, I know for a fact that there's 2 things I'm really good at. One of those is driving, the other one's sleeping. So
You don't want to get those two mixed up, though.
no, you don't want to do them at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah, so yeah. You got to always take breaks, but if you are sleeping, guys, to any of the listeners, if you are sleepy while you're driving, pull over, have a little nap, and then get back on the road again. You don't want to be sleeping while driving. We know that for sure.
That's true. 15-minute power naps actually work really well. I will say that.
Is that what you've been using in Parliament as well, a little bit? Or
No, I don't have time to have a power nap in Parliament. I wish I did sometimes, but I actually don't have time.
Yeah. So we'll get now onto our fourth question for Jade. I think Tobias, you also have this question,
Yeah,
and I think you maybe briefly talked about this before, but
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
we'll still ask the question.
On your page, it says you ran a small business in the country of Victoria for some time. Could you talk about it and your and some of the experience while running your business?
Yeah, sure. And I think again, this adds to the knowledge that the Nats in particular take into politics of having lived experience and understanding the practicalities of policy making and the implications of basing policy based on practical solutions and common sense rather than ideology that actually is really hard to implement from a practical level. So my business, when I came back from the UK, Australia was still really catching up in the digital sphere, particularly in social media. We had social media, obviously, but businesses weren't really using it at that time. So I did a feasibility study of about 3 businesses. I went to them, including my mother, who owns a retail jewelry business, and said, if I managed your social media channels and you put money into marketing this way, would you use it? And both businesses said, yeah, absolutely. So I started that day. I drew up a 5-year business plan, thinking that in 5 years, resources would be available and it would have evolved to the point where they could manage it themselves. It didn't. We were in business for 12 years. And yeah, it was great, but it allowed me to understand businesses of all kinds, so small to medium regionally based businesses, so everything from car dealerships to veterinary clinics to hospitality businesses, accommodation, hotels, bars, to retail businesses, to photographers, and then I started my own podcast too. So and that was a few
similar to
years ago.
us.
I know. Yeah. Well, there wasn't a broadcast medium in my town called Robinvale, so I thought, well, I've got a background in radio. I'll just do it myself. So I did, and it was great. It was really good fun. But I think the understanding that owning a small business means that I have a very intimate knowledge of, like I said, of how policy affects small business owners, how it affects employees and employers very, very differently. And that's probably why I really have a distaste for unnecessary public holidays, because as a consumer, you want to be able to go out and have lunch and have coffee on those public holidays. But as an employer, you know that all of those penalty rates means that either you open and you charge $15 for a coffee, or you don't open because you can't afford to. So it's a balancing act. And I think owning my own business really gave me a really good understanding of both sides of the pancake. Because I always say, it doesn't matter how flat you make a pancake, there's always 2 sides.
Yeah. I'm guessing as well you're not a big fan then of the AFL Grand Final public holiday then.
Hate it with a and I am a sport lover. I love sport in all kinds. I hate the AFL public holiday. It's just unnecessary.
I mean, I'll take a public holiday when I can get one though.
And this is the thing, right? People that aren't employers go, oh, well, I'll take a public holiday. Public holidays are great. That's fine. But how would that then be if everything was closed and you couldn't actually go out, go shopping, go for lunch? You know, if all these small businesses had to close because they simply can't afford to open, would that make your public holiday as enjoyable?
Probably not, to be honest.
There you go. Something to think about.
I mean, Coles is still open, so that's, there's at least some things still open on a public
Well,
holiday.
this is the thing. Yeah, I mean, big corporations can certainly absorb it, but what about the mum and dad small businesses that have to pay the same penalty rates as the big corporations? And it's the mum and dad small businesses that I go into bat for. As well as the businesses, the retail customer facing businesses, the food producers as well. And it doesn't escape them. If they're going to work on a public holiday, if there's fruit to come off the vine, they still have to pay those penalty rates. It just doesn't make any sense. It already costs an absolute fortune to harvest food and fiber. So, it does make things hard, because given the weather at the moment, grain harvest is happening. And although that's not overly... it's not people intensive, it's hour intensive, so it doesn't take a lot of people to do. The horticulture is very different. It takes a huge amount of people to get fruit off. And if it's really hot, or we're coming into, we know that there's a rain event coming or hail, things need to be harvested, and we haven't got the luxury of saying, oh, we're not going to do it on a public holiday. You just have to, and pay the price, unfortunately. And unfortunately, a lot of the time that is not made up at the supermarket shelves.
Yep, exactly. So if there's a public holiday and penalty rates have to apply, then you'll probably see that at the checkout.
I'd like to think you do see it at the checkout for supermarkets, but you usually don't, unfortunately.
Yeah. All right then. We'll now get on to our fifth question. And I believe, George, you actually have the next three questions, so this will be your first.
Yes, so
George.
my question is, what made you run in the 2022 first state election, and what made you join the National Party?
So the Nationals, the Victorian Nationals in particular, and we are quite different, I will say, from our federal counterparts, but the Vic Nats, as we call ourselves, are pragmatic, common sense, practical people. None of us are career politicians. We are mothers, small business owners, journalists. We have a hospital CEO. We have a tomato farmer and a former president of the VFF as our leader. We're just common sense. We've even got a plumber now, which is really handy when I have some issues. We're just common sense, practical people. And if you look at the 13 principles on our website, they're all pretty sensibly centre. I know historically some people are, view the Nats as being these awful right-wing people, but we're actually really sensible, common sense people that understand, the implications of different policies. But also, I wanted to have an effect on policy, and the Nats are a really grassroots political party. All of our policies come from our members, essentially. So through state conference, all members have the ability to draft up motions that they wish to become policy, and we're the only party that does that. So there was really no question in my mind where my values lay, and where I could have the biggest impact. The Nationals were it. What drove me to run was COVID, really. I could see that previous to me, we had an independent representative who voted with the government most of the time, even through COVID, where we had no cases up in regional Victoria, and she was voting for lockdowns and windfall taxes and things like this, which make the rental crisis even more difficult because it disincentivises private landlords, which we need, because rentals come from people that own more than one property. So when that happened, I kind of went, I'm not thrilled with how I'm being represented. I don't feel like how we're being represented is reflective of the community. So I got a phone call one day from Peter Walsh, and I was mayor at the time, and he said, have you ever thought about a career in politics? And I went, well, I'm currently a mayor, Peter. Obviously, I've thought about it, but I haven't really thought any further than local government. He goes, you're pretty good at it. Maybe you should. And I went, well, all right, I'll have a think about it. And I think my husband and I went to a branch meeting in a couple of weeks after that, and Peter had a word to him and said, is she in? Are you in? And he went, yeah, let's do it. So the rest, as they say, is history.
The rest is history. I just want to say one point that you did bring up first when you answered that question. You separated the Vic Nats from the national party as a whole in the whole of Australia. So, because I think that is something that is talked about a lot. I think your former deputy leader, the name always mistakes me. Steph, is it Steph?
Steph Ryan, yeah.
Steph Ryan, yeah.
Steph Ryan.
I remember, I think a year or two ago, she was, I think, specifically on the issue of climate change, she was getting very mad at Barnaby Joyce and Michael McCormack, the leaders of the federal Nats. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is why I think we say we are a different entity because of the likes of Barnaby. And this is the thing, right? Some people will go, oh, the Nats are climate deniers. That's absolutely not true. We've got people who are, like my husband is a very large scale commercial farmer. We've also got regenerative farmers and wool growers. We've got sustainable. We're not climate deniers at all. We understand that, and we're certainly not anti-renewables. We just want to do it right the first time. Again, we're practical people. So if we're going to move to renewables, then we want to make sure the transmission lines are in the right spot. Let's upgrade existing easements so we don't cause any more unrest to existing landscapes and farmland. yes, we understand that we need mining, because without mining, particularly mineral sands, we don't have electric vehicles, we don't have iPhones, iPads, etc., etc. So, but we also understand that electric vehicles are no better for the environment than currently than diesel engines. If you're going to mine the lithium ion from here, ship it over to Korea so it's made, and then ship the cars back, and then plug it into what's largely coal generated power. Is that really any better? There's a lot of shipping. Anyway, so we're actually we are quite different, and we realise that we have to. There's a lot of people that are quite big environmentalists, and I always say that there's no bigger environmentalist than a food producer or a farmer, because the land and having healthy land and waterways is our livelihood. We can't produce food unless we are looking after our planet.
Exactly. Yeah, so we'll get on now to our sixth question. I think George, as well, as I said before, you have the sixth question.
Yeah, so the question is, who would you say is a political role model and idol?
This is a difficult one for me. There's many. This might be controversial, but what Joan Kerner did, and I know she was Labor, but don't tell anyone, what she did for education in Victoria, I think was very, very admirable. And she came in, and I think we're back at that stage now, the Kane Kerner Kennett days, way before you guys were born. But what Joan Kerner was able to come in and do off the back of John Kane for education in particular, had a lot of merit. And it was still very much a boys' club in those days. Now the Vic Nats have more women in the party room than men, which is unheard of. But back in those days, I think she was really a bit of a stalwart. And also Jeanette Powell, who was the first woman to be elected to the Victorian Nationals in the Legislative Assembly.
There's an election on in Flinders,
going very, very strong.
and I know who I will back. It's a hard-working man called Carter. Helps anyone on the track.
These people that pave the way for others to follow. Anyone that's the first one to do something, I think, deserves credit. So yeah, credit where credit's due for Joan Kerner, but then also Peter Walsh, our leader at the moment. He's a tomato grower at the end of the day, and he's been able to have a 20-year-long career in politics and make a bit of a difference. And I did save his life once, but that's a story for another day.
Actually, you can quickly talk about it now. We've got a bit of time.
It's Peter and I, when I came back from overseas, Peter used to paddle in the Murray River Marathon, and this was must have been 2010, after the 2010 election, because they were in government, and he was the Minister for Water. And we're out practicing one day on kayaks, on TK2 kayaks, and he fell out. And he remembers it very differently. Just let me preface it with that. He remembers it with apparently as me pushing him out. I did not push him out, but I did, when he came out of the kayak, I did manage to get him over to the bank. Now, he says that he can swim and that I pushed him. That's not how I remember it. I remember it as him falling out and me saving his life getting to the bank because he couldn't swim. But I just thought that was hilarious. He's the Minister for Water and he can't swim. Anyway, I tell that story often and he laughs at me. He's like, that's not how it went. I'm like, well, that's how I remember it. It was 13 years ago. Doesn't really matter.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting, though, that Joanne Kerner is one of your political idols, especially since, the National Party is probably the oldest current non-Labor party in Australia. And previous to this, we had Nick McGowan on our podcast, and he was ripping into us because the interview we did previous to that was with Matthew Hiller-Curry, and Matthew said as well that his political idol was Joanne Kerner. And Nick McGowan was ripping into us because he was saying Joanne Kerner, like, she destroyed the whole state, basically. So it's very interesting that you see her as a political idol.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to have a look at the intricacies of it, right? So,
Yeah.
yes, I mean, that after John Cain and the state was already stuffed before Kerner came in. And she did leave us completely broke like we are now, which is why I say history is repeating itself. But she did a couple of, and she was the first one. She came in, she was the first woman premier of the state, in a boys' club. So she must have had skin as thick as leather. So Nick can go off tap as much as he wants. How unlike Nick McGowan, bless him, a Liberal colleague. But I think when you look at it from a different perspective, which is, I think, one gift that the Nats have, we have the ability, because we've had previous careers and things like that, we have the gift of perspective, which is really good.
True. Very, very true. So now we'll get on to our...
Sorry, Francis, I'm just going to add, I think the Nats are unique in that we have the ability to work with people of both sides if they meet us halfway. So it's one of those things that you can actually work with people to get the outcomes you want, because we're not there for ourselves, we're there for our communities, because we need to make sure that regional Victoria has a very strong voice and has a seat at the table. So I think most of the time we'll do whatever we can to work in a productive way with both sides of Parliament.
Yeah, I think also, since you bring up that point, I think back in history as well, like pre-1950s, Nationals and Labor were in coalition for some parts of government in that time. I remember because my great grandfather actually was best mates with the former premier in the 1930s of Labor, Edmund Hogan, who switched over to the Nats. Yeah, so because they're from the same part of Ballarat, so around Matt Edgerton, Gordon, that part of Balan, that part of outside Ballarat. So I have a bit of Labor politics within me. So my great grandfather, so my dad's grandfather, basically. Yeah.
So you have Nat's pedigree almost.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit.
That's fantastic. That's great. And
I could be a Nats politician in the future. Yeah.
Mate, we have a Melbourne branch. Honestly, if you join the Melbourne branch of the Nationals.
I mean, I live in the suburbs, so I don't know how am I going to represent the Nats here.
Well, I mean, a lot of it, because we're all over the state, a lot of our branch meetings are conducted by Zoom anyway. So, that's fine. But if you join, a young Nats membership is like $10.
Maybe. I'll consider it. I got to give all three political parties a chance, of course. And four.
Are you going to? Well, a lot of them are very, very different to one another. I mean,
that is true.
Greens values are not always, in fact, seldom the same.
That is true. But yeah, so I have a little bit of Labor and Nationals blood in me.
Yeah.
And then quickly as well, like my grandfather left Labor though for DLP in 55. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
All over the place. That's very interesting.
And then my family then became Liberal voters. So it's gone all over the place, basically.
So are they still Liberal voters?
My dad still votes DLP to the day, even though it's like the party's changed a bit over the years. He still tries to vote DLP as much as possible. But when DLP is not there, he'll vote Liberal.
Yeah, I think all political parties have evolved. Like, even the Country Party and the Nats, we have to evolve. If you don't evolve, you get left behind, right? So, the year 2023 is very, very different to 1993. The economic landscape, everything is very different. Political landscapes, people are more self-aware. They're more, social media's had a huge impact on how people see the world and how they think. So I think political parties have to evolve and they have to know their communities. And that is one thing that the Nats do really, really well. We're part of our communities.
There's an election on in Flinders, and I know who I will back. It's a hard-working man called Carter. Helps anyone on the track.
Anyone remember Pac-Man? You know that little thing that just goes around gobbling up like that? That's Bill Shorten's tax policy. And you know how it chases people around in the maze? That's Bill Shorten's tax policy. The only space he's going to invade is your wallet.
So yeah, after a short little break there in between our recording sessions, we're back now, and we're just going to quickly ask the final question to Jade, because I recognize that she's got to go off to a CFA meeting. And what time is that supposed to start, Jade?
It was supposed to be at 10:30, but I've messaged my office staff and said, look, can you reschedule? Because it's a town that's about 20 minutes away. So
Yeah.
and CFA volunteers are also, they've got other jobs. So I just said, reschedule it for 11:30 so they can go back to work for an hour.
Yeah, so we'll quickly get through this last question so you can
Cool.
head off as quick as possible. So yeah, George, you have the last question, I think.
Oh yeah. So finally, what's one piece of advice you would give to students in 2024, especially those who are entering university or high school?
Don't stress. I know that's easy to say, but there are so many pathways into whatever you want to do now that ATAR scores and university marks are not the be all and end all. And also think about if classroom learning isn't for you, think about a traineeship or an apprenticeship. I'm the product of a traineeship and I had a great time. I was also earning money while all my friends were at university living on 2-minute noodles. So, yeah, I mean, I would say that there are many pathways and many options, and chances are you'll have multiple career paths over the course of your life anyway. My motto has always been, it's all about the book, which means at the end of your life, if you were to sit down with the book of your life, would it be an interesting read? Would it have a lot of chapters? Would you want to read your own book because of how interesting and engaging it is? So never say no to an opportunity. That's what that means. Keep writing chapters. If you have to go the long way around, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Taking the scenic route is never a bad thing, I don't think. It leads to many experiences and other pathways. So, yeah, I mean, I would say don't ever say no to an opportunity. You will get luckier the harder you work. That is a fact, and that's true with everything in life. People will say to me often, "Oh, you're so lucky," and I'm like, "Mate, I haven't slept since September last year. I am. You do get luckier the harder you work." So, and the other thing I would say is that you are someone. We can sit back and say, "Oh, someone should fix that. Someone should do something about that. Even someone should pick up that piece of rubbish." Well, who is someone? You're someone. You can do that. You can pick up the rubbish. You can do something about that. You can have an effect. Join a political party. Have influence on policy moving forward. Have influence on, we're under the Westminster parliamentary system. Chances are it's going to be the two major parties in power until a time comes that our system is different. So join a political party and have influence from the inside. But you are someone. If you keep saying someone should do something about something, well, you are
Do it
someone.
yourself.
So yeah, get it done. Don't rely on other people to do things for you, and much less the government.
Exactly. I think one of the great sayings as well is hard work beats talent because talent still has to work hard. So that's
that's exactly right. And Sam Groth, who you'll hopefully get to interview, is a perfect example of that. He says himself that he was never really a talented tennis player, but he worked harder than everybody else. And I think he shows that in Parliament now. He has worked really hard to get where he is, and even I'm guilty of going, it's just another athlete entering politics. But he actually has worked really hard to be really knowledgeable in his electorate and policy and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, he's a testament to that hard work will beat talent any given day of the week.
Exactly. So yeah, that's all our questions that we're going to ask you, Jade. I'd like to thank you again for joining us for nearly an hour now. So hopefully you haven't taken too much time out of your day, because I know you have your CFA meeting coming up that you need to go to. So yeah.
That is okay. I did say to my EA when she put this in, I went, oh yeah, sure, it should only take 15 minutes unless I talk too much. And that's probably another reason I'm in politics now. So thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, thank you again. And hopefully we'll get to see you on Wednesday. We'll probably come down. We might go down and watch Question Time. Hopefully you don't get kicked out. I can't wait to see poor Ed Brooke get kicked out. He probably
if he's even back in. I think he got kicked out at the end of last week. So
Oh.
we'll wait and see. Yeah, that's Paul for you.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you again for joining us today, and yeah, thank you to everyone for listening and watching, and yeah, we'll see you guys in the next episode.